Wilmington, Ohio is a city of over 12,000 people. It's a simple town, not a whole lot to offer, but within its limits on Sylvan Drive live two people who are very dear to me, my grandparents. Grandparents are precious gems that people often take for granted. Some don't take the time to get to know their grandparents, or what the circumstances were that led to their meeting. I have taken it upon myself to discover my roots and to find out what the series of events were that led to my existence. And that is the story that I want to share with you.
My name is William Moore.
And my name is Morviv Moore. I go by nickname Ritchie because Morviv is a Welsh name and no one can pronounce it in this country. I've been married to my husband 63 years, coming March the 8th, about 6 weeks from now, 2010. And I've put up with Archie Bunker that long.
And
I need a medal.
It's taken her 63 years to learn how to win an argument. I was born in the beautiful hills surrounding Berea, Kentucky, a beautiful part of the country. And my family moved to Ohio when I was approximately 5 years old. And I had 6 sisters and 4 brothers. But anyway, we all had a loving family and enjoyed each other. And of course, we had to make our own fun. Our parents didn't have money to buy a lot of toys and things like that to keep us occupied. We just make our own toys and make our own games. But we had a good family and a good life. I was closest to my brother George, whom he was 5 years older than me. We had joined the Army together. One thing that kept us close together, and stayed in the Army 5 years in the same company together, 4 years overseas in World War II, and we were discharged together from the Army after the war, and went to work for General Motors together. We did everything together, seemingly. To give some highlights of Army life overseas in battle, we landed in Normandy and went on through France and Germany in the Battle of the Bulge, and we were in Czechoslovakia when the war ended. We went through 5 major battles, and George and I did it all together. Seemed like what one did, the other one did.
I'm from Swansea, South Wales, beautiful Wales. We had a wonderful childhood in Wales, beautiful scenery. We live very, very close to the ocean, about 2.5 miles from the ocean.
So tell me about your parents.
My dad was named Henry Seymour, and my mother was, he married Lucy Ann, the former Lucy Ann Barclay. My dad farmed all his life and made maybe a little bit of moonshine along with it.
My father's name was Thomas Richard. He was a policeman for 30 years until he retired and came to this country after I did, 4 years after I came here. And my mother's name was Mary Ann Heaven. My father was just a wonderful, wonderful man. Everybody loved him and respected him. Even people that he arrested. And my 2 brothers also immigrated to America. Emlyn stayed here until his death in 1991. And Alan stayed here and lived in New York for 14 years. But when my mother and dad died, he went back to Wales. And I believe he always regretted it.
That was 2001, not 1991.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
She had her brother dead 10 years before he died.
What were your dreams growing up?
Thinking back, I really didn't have many dreams or expectation because I never had anything, or my family had very little to begin with. We were poor in one sense, rich in another sense. I remember of the good things that we had, which was plenty to eat. We lived on a farm. Didn't have very many fancy clothes. Wearing dungarees and bibbed overalls and things like this, even going to school. But I always had plenty to eat, and I was thankful of that. So really, I didn't have many expectations of or dreams, except that maybe having a nice, loving family to be with.
Growing up, I loved to go see American movies. And my favorite was Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy films. She's a beautiful singer, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing there ever was. And I used to dream of a night of going to America. I was maybe 11 or 12, and I used to dream of going to America and living with Jeanette MacDonald and marrying
Freddie?
Huh?
Freddie Bartholomew.
Freddie Bartholomew. He was in Captains Courageous with Spencer Tracy, and I thought he was a cute little boy.
Tell me the story about how the two of you met.
Well, after spending 2 years in Iceland, our outfit went to Britain, England, and that was on August the 15th, 1943. And I met, well, my two buddies and I, we always hung around together, and we had a weekend pass to go to this little town of Salisbury, and we stayed all night in the Red Cross and got up on a Saturday morning and thought we'd go out to get something to eat. Well, we didn't know which way to turn, but we saw a truckload of young girls sitting along the curb, and they were looking out the back of the truck, and what they were doing was waiting for the forelady to come along and take them out to a farm to do some farm work, dig potatoes or whatever. I don't know what they were doing that day. But anyway, the forelady came out and says, "It's raining too hard. We're not going to work today." So the girls started, "Hey, way to go." So us three guys went up to the truck and asked the girls if they knew a good place that we could get some breakfast. So you want to tell what happened from then on?
Well, myself and two friends, we were in the Land Army. We had a choice in Britain when we were 17. If we joined while we were 17, we could choose where we wanted to serve. So we didn't want the Navy, Army, or the Air Force. We didn't want to go into the ammunition factories. We liked the Land Army uniform, so I think my friend and I chose the Land Army just because it had a pretty uniform or a nice uniform.
Yeah, but what happened with these three Yanks?
Anyway, Bill and his two friends, I didn't like Americans because you had a bad name if you dated an American at that time. And they asked us to show them a way to the restaurant. So we did. We said, well, follow us. We're going that way. But when we got there, it might have been about 2 blocks or 3 blocks away. It was closed. So then we said, well, let's go down to the restaurant near the cathedral. They had a beautiful cathedral in Salisbury. So when we got there, the 3 of them asked us girls to go in and have some breakfast with them. Well, we didn't want breakfast, but we said we'd go in and have a cup of tea. And we did. And Bill seemed to walk with me. And that's how we met. And we dated for 6 weeks. When he left, I wrote to tell him that I didn't want to correspond anymore because I didn't think I'd ever see him again. But when I heard that his outfit was over in France fighting after D-Day, I wrote to him, and I had been missing him after he left. We weren't serious, like I said, but I was missing him after he left, but too proud to write to him. But after D-Day, I wrote, and I didn't hear anything for 3 months. So I figured he was either killed or he just didn't want to correspond with me. But one day his letter came, and he said that he had been hurt burnt with gunpowder, his hands and part of his face. And they'd sent him back to England to a hospital for 6 weeks.
I also met with their 3 boys to see if they knew of any war stories their dad had told them.
The earliest story that Dad told us about World War II that I remember wasn't true, of course, but Dad told us that when he met Mom, that the Germans had captured her and stuck her in a foxhole. And of course, being raised on the farm, I thought the foxhole was just a little foxhole. So I just imagine, she's sticking down in this foxhole, and the only thing is her head sticking out. Of course, now I know different, but of course he said that the Germans stuck her in this foxhole, and he went and killed all the Germans and rescued her, and that's how he met Mom.
One of the stories I remember Dad telling us was the story about when he was on patrol one day. He was a scout, forward scout, and the patrol was in jeeps. I don't know how many there were, 3 or 4 or 5, and he was up front in his jeep driving down this old road, and for some reason the jeep behind him decided he wanted to pass Dad. So the guy behind him in his jeep passed him on that old dirt road, came back around in front, and right after he passed him, the jeep ran over a landmine, blew up. One of the guys, I don't know if it killed any of them or not, but it tore him up pretty bad. One of the guys, Dad said his leg was sticking way back here like this, just right after he had passed Dad's jeep. And if he hadn't done that, of course, Dad would have ran over it, and who knows what would have happened. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
One is when Dad was in France, he was, I may have the details a little bit off here, but he was cleaning something with ammunition or
Phosphorus grenades.
yeah, grenades.
Phosphorus.
Okay, and it exploded and it burned his hands, and he got 2nd or 3rd degree burns on his hands, I forget which, and he was sent to England, I think, for 6 weeks to recover in the hospital. And always thought it was interesting because they offered Dad a Purple Heart for that, and he turned it down because he just an integrity issue. He says, well, that was my own fault, and so I don't deserve one, and he turned it down. And it just is interesting, that kind of integrity, based on the stories we hear heard from a certain presidential candidate that he got 4 or 5 Purple Hearts, and I think one was for a hangnail. And so I always thought that was kind of a neat story that he had turned that down.
And the thing I remember about that story too, Keith, is that that Dad didn't feel that all the men that were shot and killed over there, that he didn't deserve a medal for getting wounded when compared to what other people were going through.
I was 13 when the war started in September the 3rd of 39. I was 14. Pretty soon after the war started, I believe the first attack we had was being we lived along the ocean. The Germans would cross the ocean and you really didn't know exactly where they were going to go, because they could come in and then go on up, you know, either left or right, attack any city they wanted to.
It had a large port.
But our Swansea had a large seaport, and the first time they attacked, they came down and machine gunned several, I can't remember how many, but several workers on the docks, and many were killed. I think that was the first attack we had. Oh, and another thing, February in 42, I believe it was, the Germans came over 3 nights in succession from 9 o'clock of a night till 5 the next morning. And
wave after wave, eh?
Wave after wave. And the 3 nights it demolished our whole city. And it was devastating. It was just horrible. I mean, everything was gone. Where I worked was bombed, and it really was devastating to see a whole city being destroyed in 3 nights.
Well, to give a quick summary about my war experiences, I can't remember a tenth of it, but I'll try. I was 16 years old, and my brother George came to me one day, and in fact it was August 15th, 1940. We went to and joined the Army then together. And he says, well, I'm going to the Army, Bill, you want to go along? And I says, okay, might as well. Ain't nothing happening here. And like I say, I was 16 years old, just a kid, seeking adventure. So we joined, and we were stateside about 1 year and 3 months before we finally were shipped out to Iceland. Of course, and we didn't know where we were going. We knew we were going overseas, but they told us they couldn't keep us there over 3 months, only in case of a national emergency. So you know what happened in 3 months? Pearl Harbor. So that fixed that. So we ended up actually staying 4 years overseas altogether. But we stayed. We stayed 2 years in Iceland, 6 weeks in Britain, 9 months in Ireland, and then over right after D-Day in Normandy, and we landed in Normandy. It took another 10 months for Germany to surrender. And of course, I don't know why the war didn't really shake me up. I guess I thought I was invincible and nothing could hurt me, you know. And I think a lot of people, soldiers, were like that. Someone would crack up and others would take the opposite view. And so I never was really shook up too much about the war. I don't know why. Ignorance, maybe. But finally, the war ended with Germany, and we came home. And of course, I wasn't able to go back to England to see Ritchie until we had to come on home. And then months later, I sent for her to come over to be my bride. And she took pity on me and said yes. We're here today to honor the different veterans of different wars in Wilmington, Ohio, at this beautiful monument that was dedicated about 1 year ago. And it's honoring the men and women who have fought and served in the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Operation Desert Storm, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Here's some bricks that is particularly interesting to me is these 4 right here. Sergeant George Moore, which was my brother, and myself, William Moore, and my son, Philip David Moore, and my brother's son, George W. Moore. And of course, my brother and I served in World War II for 5 years, and 4 years of that was overseas. And then we served in the same company, by the way, all those years. These plaques, black ones here on the floor, are commemorate those from Clinton County and of different wars, from the Civil War on down to the most recent wars. Those that have were taken prisoners of war, and killed in action, and missing in action.
You'll never know just how much I love you.
Miss you.
You'll never know just how much I care.
And if there's some other way to prove that I love you, I'm sure I don't know how. You'll never know if you don't know now. I got to do that.
You'll never know just how much I miss you. You'll never know just how much I care. And if I tried, I still couldn't hide my love for you. You ought to know, for haven't I told you so?